All right, this is the River Runners Oral History Project. We're here talking to Garth Marston, and we're at National Canyon. This is September 16th, 1994, and we're on the GCES Stanton Photo trip. We're on the photo rematch trip, and I'm Lew Steiger, and Jeff Robertson's running the camera. I should have probably said this before we rolled, but what we're going to do with this is we'll do this interview and we'll probably sit down and transcribe it, send you a copy of it, and make sure that we got it right, and then we'll archive all this stuff in the River Runners Oral History collection there at NAU. So you'll get a crack at any of this, before we ever release any of it to the public or anything. And then as far as what we do with it otherwise, we might make a little video. We're going to try to make a little show for everybody on the trip, which will probably take about a year to get done.
Yes. Well, I think another thing, Lou, is accuracy. Obviously, I want to remember everything as well as I possibly can, but it's been a while, and 52 years is a long time. I happened to read a book about Cortez. And Cortez was quite a guy, as you know. But the point is that the history was written by us. It was an autobiographical. He wrote it himself, but he had the help of a son or a cousin or somebody like that who helped him out. But he did it after 88 years. So you can imagine, here's a guy in a fairly senile, number one. Number two, 88 years is a long time. So I just presume that is the case with most of your interviews, that we try to do the very best that we can for you.
Okay. I guess we ought to just start with a little bit of a resume. How did you first come to the... Actually, let me fix this thing. I gotta change this a little bit. Yeah, I'm hearing... I don't know if I can... Okay, that'll be good. Let's try that. I'm not crowding you with this mic, am I?
No.
Okay, good. Let's just start with a little bit of your background, as though nobody'd ever heard of you or your dad, and kind of how you came to the river and that first trip that you did. Was that in 42 that you first?
42, yes. Well, it was it's really a family characteristic, I suppose, put it that way, and the love of and working with water. Not river water before, but my father's dad was a naval sea captain, master mariner, and spent a lot of time in the India trade, owned a 5-masted schooner for a while, and sailed it all over the world. My father was an executive officer in the submarine corps during the First World War. For you young guys, that's from about 1914 to 1916 or 18. Then I guess I broke the chain insofar as the military is concerned, but because when the war started, I signed up for the Air Force and not submarine.
This is two.
This is World War II, right? It seems so long ago that you wonder. Well, so anyway, the Navy and water has been in our background for quite a long time. As a result of the war, one of the Neville's trips was canceled or substantially canceled. And a fellow, Neil Wilson, called my father and asked if he has a space, if he has any interest in going down through the Grand Canyon. And he said, there are 4 spaces available with Neville's. Would you like to go? I'll take my son if you take yours. So it took them, I think, probably less than a day to determine we're going to go ahead and do it. So that's how we got onto this particular Leech. Everything else started from there, from the first trip, and it was 1942.
And so that was your dad's first trip too.
Yes. And I'm not so sure I went down the canyon with him. I think there's a good chance that he went down the canyon with me, because I think they like to put us in the lead boat and probably the best drivers. And I just assumed that happened with me. I was probably up with Norm Neville's. I haven't looked at the record, but it's available.
You mean you were rowing a boat right off the bat?
No, I was 16 in 1942, and my friend Buzz, no, it's Neil, not Neil. Neil Wilson's the father, and Bruce Wilson is the son, and he was age 12 when we went. And I see him from time to time. He lives over in Lafayette, California, in the Bay Area. That's how it started, that far back. What was the rest of the question, then?
That was just it, because I understand you did the trip in 42, and then you came back later as a boatman for Neville's.
Yes, that was sort of a dramatic situation, I think, when I came back as a boatman. We'd gone on the 42 trip, and we signed up again with Norm for the 47 trip, 1947, same kinds of boats. And we gathered on the shore in Green River, Wyoming, and we planned to take off the next day. And here we are in this beautiful canyon. The other one was about as high, and I think it was a sheer face, from the ground to the top. It was about the same size as this one. Lew, you're going to have to tell us how high these are, but it was about the same. And so Norm started in. He loved to tease and joke. He felt that was one of the things that you do as a leader. And so we were sitting around listening to his jokes, and then one of the fellows said something that he picked up, and he started in on this guy. Oh yes, these cliffs are 3,000 feet. We're out here. We were out on a spit of land out away from the shore, and he said those once in a while let go, and the blast pushes them out into the river. And I mean, he went on and on. He had this guy hooked. The next morning we woke up, and one of the guys was gone. I mean, he had literally packed up and left. Now, and it wasn't Kent. I don't remember the fellow's name, but he took off and left. The joke was on Norm, however, because it was one of his boatmen who picked up and left the trip. So anyway, Norm looked around and assessed the situation. He said, "Well, Garth, congratulations, you've just become a boatman." And I remember that first, my wife was with me. We were about 21, I guess, at that time, and my dad. We spent some time talking things over, and he said, "You're it. You're our guy." Well, there wasn't much else we could do, and then my wife got onto the boat, and I got into the boat, and I'll never forget the first set of waves. They were just sand waves. Of course, sand waves can get pretty big, and so we started in, and the first time we had what do you call it, where the bow goes up and way down and up and way down. We do it here on this trip. In any event, can we go bowing?
Bow riding or?
Bow riding is what it is. That's it. It's terrific. I mean, it's a lot of fun, and it gets you a chance to see where all the water's going. But in any event, we started out, and Shirley started bow riding up like that, and she thought, I have a baby at home, I'm pregnant with another one, will I ever get back to the family? And It worked out. It worked out pretty well, I think, for everybody concerned. We didn't turn any boats over, and as I recall, now this is a recollection that I'd have to check on. We did the green, and whether I can't remember whether we got out at Vernal or went through Desolation Gray. I think we got out at Vernal. Question: is this? Am I giving too much detail or too little, or?
This is fine.
Okay.
Just fine. So, did you? So then, how many did you do? Several trips for Neville's as a boatman, subsequently.
My best recollection of that, Lew, is that we did the first one as passengers, which I prefer not to do. I'd rather be a boatman any day. We did the second after the war, 47 and 48. My dad went to work for him, and I went to work for him in the summertime. And it was so that was 2 trips when I worked for him. Then my dad and Ed Hudson put the Esmeralda down through the canyon, and I don't know all the details here. May have been upsetting to Norm, it may not have been. I've never read any accounts of what his mindset would have been. But in any event, he crashed in his airplane not too long afterwards, and so my dad didn't take over his operation. We just did the trips, first of all, to have a heck of a lot of fun, because it is fun. We want to break even, and I think we broke even most of the time. But it wasn't to make money. And so that is 2, 1 as a guest and 2 as a workman. After Norm died, then a number of other boats or trips came up. We ran with my dad, Dock Marston. We ran twin outboards, or 2 boats with inboards. We did the Disney crew for Disney, and then we did the uprun of the Colorado. So between 47 and about 61 or 62, there were a lot of innovations, a lot of frontier groundbreaking, if you will.
Was it the Disney trip first and then the uprun? That was the correct.
And then the what?
And then the uprun. That was the sequence.
Disney was first.
How was? Can you tell us a little bit about that trip? What were the circumstances? That was for 10 Who Dared?
Yes.
What was? How did that trip go? And
well,
what sticks out about it in your memory now?
Well, that's a good question. It was a lot of fun to do that trip. We had a bunch of guys from Disney Studios who were a bunch of old pros, and we were the doubles for them. But the interesting thing was, after we acted as doubles for Powell and Galloway and all those fellas, they had to find somebody. They had to find somebody who was who they had to find somebody like who looked like Powell's understudy rather than Powell himself. In other words, the key person to replicate was not the star, it was the guy who'd been down there at the bottom of the canyon and putting his, quote, life on the line. That's too dramatic, but anyway, this was a major concern for them. We didn't have any problem then. There were certain things like making the Emmeline and the various boats, making them look like the original boats. And they also, for for the other boats, but that is, oh, for steering. What they did was to extend the boat about 3 feet in the aft. So the transom was here, and 3 feet back of the transom was the fake transom, and that was also a well that held a couple of motors, Johnson's, I suppose. And then they brought some sort of a ring out from the boat itself, and the Johnsons came out to our leg muscles, and then there was a semi-round piece of metal that came out, and so when we were up there, you'd see us in the movie going back and forth. The guy wasn't just reacting to the waves; he was steering the boat.
Oh my gosh!
And
with the motor.
with the motor going.
Well, how come they decided? Did they feel you just had to have a motor to control those boats, or?
Oh yes, yeah, because they. And again, as I recall, what they did was to get the people. They'd get the people with experience riding backwards. In other words, Flavel, he runs with the stern first, facing his danger. But in the Powell days, everybody got into the boat except for Powell, who got up on deck, as you know. But they got in with their backs to their danger, if you will. And so it was very important they couldn't have done their own steering. Mm-hmm. They'd have to have somebody like Powell on the sweep oar. But then, having said that, the guys on the sweep oar, that was not a very reliable, as I understand it, a very reliable way to steer.
Yeah, I heard from the IMAX that they actually just rode those boats and they didn't handle wasn't as good a design as what we have now.
Mm-hmm. You had to be careful that you didn't see smoke coming out of the transom.
Were there particular incidents that stick out in your memory as just from that trip, funny stories, or what do you remember? What was the best part of that thing, and what was the worst of it?
Well, one of the fun things. Oh, excuse me. One of the fun things about it was working with the fellows from Disney. And I think the reason that Disney came to my dad was that several years ago, a fellow named Al Malott, who did Lion Country and the Platypus, and did one about the peninsula, it was one of their favorites at the Disney Studios. He did some work with my dad on something, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but they got along extremely well. And Al Malott would go down, he's dead now incidentally, he would go down to Hollywood and spend a lot of time in the studio there because he was sort of a featured filmmaker for the Disney Studios. He recommended to Walt that Walt select my dad as probably the technical advisor. And they got along well, and so that's what he did. Well, we got a chance to meet a lot of those fellas down there, and they're an interesting bunch of people.
Did it turn out to be a pretty good movie?
Lousy, I thought. Well, they take a shot at it, and the next one will do better. But it was just sort of a hyped up script, which I don't think was necessary. They had a pretty good plot, and as it was, they didn't have to put stuff into one arm. He was one arm, but climbing up a cliff and putting a bunch of that kind of thing in the movie in the way that they actually did it. Mm-hmm. I would rather see it straight than resort to this kind of showmanship. I suppose.
That trip with the Esmeralda, is that the one that Willie Taylor was on? Was he?
Now, there's some stories around here. The answer to my question is going to be, I don't know. There's some stories around here that I had not heard about in the past. I mean, Willie's necktie.
You hadn't heard that story?
I had never heard it.
But you were on the trip where Willie died.
Yeah, that's right.
And when was that? I'm sorry. I know that you told.
About 56, I think.
I know that you told the group this, but I just was off. We didn't hear it.
Yeah.
I heard people said that was a great story and stuff. I wonder what
Well, it was 1956, I think, on the plaque it gives that date.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Willie was. I didn't realize. I think he ran 2 or 3 times, maybe 4. But that's why he really liked that canyon. I mean, he's never been able to do anything macho in the past. So this was his chance to do it. And Willie Taylor's just a great guy. He was just a delightful individual. He'd come along here, he'd have a ball being here with us tonight. Of course, the upside potential is fantastic. So.
The upset potential?
No, he would enjoy being here. I said, although the upside is fantastic if he were here, those circumstances could hardly be believed. There was one story that has remained with us over a period of time, and this is the first time I've ever told it outside of Bob Malott, who used to be the chairman of FMC Corp, and my dad, and it involved the Bisney trip. And one of the guys, one of the grips, was a former Marine, and he was a former Marine till you had it up to here. I had a son-in-law who was a Marine, and they have certain characteristics that are sort of tough for some people to live with. Not everybody, but some. So we'd have mess, and we'd have roll call, and we'd have all these things. He got out there and he planted his flag and he played his trumpet, and we finally said, what are we going to do with this guy? Well, Bob and I hatched up a scheme, and it's as though we were sitting around here tonight calculating it, because it was a warm night. I think that it was at Nankoweap, and a warm night, and we concocted a scheme whereby we would swipe his Marine Corps flag and plant it up on the top of the ramparts in Nankoweap. And my friend Bob said, God, that's great. How are we going to get up there? Or how are we going to wake up? And I said, don't worry. I wake up every night about 3 or 4 times a night. We won't have any problem. So that's what we did. I had a couple of beers before I went to bed. In about 2 hours, the call came. And Bob and I went over and got the flag. And we walked up to the top of the first plateau, planted the flag, came back down. We could hardly, we were both laughing so hard we could hardly come in. Anyway, we got back into camp, and there you can imagine the normal thing where he finally discovered that it was gone, and he wasn't going anyplace until it was found, and we said, okay, stick around. You might as well look for it, because you'll never know what happened. Oh, gosh. Anyway, we finally told him. But he had to go up and get it. But that was one of the funniest things that I can remember having happen on the river.
How are we doing on this, on Willie? What was that? What do you think So with Willie Taylor, had you known him before that trip that you went on there?
Yes. Both Willie and my dad were Bohemians in San Francisco, and they both sang in the chorus.
Which chorus?
Oh, the chorus, Bohemian Club chorus. And right across, well, my dad worked, I guess he worked in San Francisco at this particular time. Both Willie and my dad were in the traveling chorus. So they spent a lot of time together, and they have the general chorus, and then they have a few people out of the chorus itself who go and put on special presentations for Rotary clubs and that kind of thing. So they got to know each other very well, and they spent, because they lived in Berkeley together. Well, no, I'm sorry, they didn't live together, but each of them lived in Berkeley, so they spent a lot of time together.
I've heard that story several times from different angles. I guess one of the Sandersons must have been there. I heard Jerry Sanderson told that. Was it Jerry Sanderson that was on that trip with you guys, or was it Rod Sanderson?
I think that it's Rod Sanderson. He was another fine guy. You know, you have to have intelligent, experienced people around on the trips who can do anything, or they and 5 other guys can do everything that you want to have them can possibly go wrong. And Rod was that kind of a guy. He just was the kind of a fellow that, to me, anything you say we have to, he said, why, sure. And it disappears with whatever it is. He comes back and it's fixed. I'm not like that. If it were myself and came back, it would be broken more, I suppose.
He does. It seems like a bunch of those early guys, I mean, well, and you too, I mean, not to take away, it seems like there was kind of a natural selection that went on there. If you weren't of a certain mindset, or if you didn't have a certain capabilities, you weren't going to come down here anyway.
Yes. Well, you're exactly right. We needed a group that could get together, and we needed a variation of abilities. Because, you know, when you have a boat down there and you break it, you have to get that thing up on its side, and you have to get somebody to repair the fiberglass, knows how to do that, etc. That's something that not everybody has to know how to do everything, but there have to be experience and technically minded, you know, in terms of repairs. I mean, I could about the one thing that I ever did that I can remember that I'm sure glad I did. 3 of us set off at Hants together. And I was driving, and we set off from the right shore. And not many people run the right bank anymore. But anyway, we'd been talking up there and going through our plans, etc., and the motors were revving up. And all of a sudden, except for the rapid, there was dead silence. And you guys have heard the worst 3 words when we're making love? Hello, dear. I'm home. And in this case, there was silence, dead silence. And I thought to myself, holy smoke, who was the wise guy who turned off the engines? Because we were about 10, 15 feet from shore and heading out, and the engines died. And I thought one of these guys, sort of a wise guy in the boat, and I thought that it was he. But it wasn't. They just, both of them cut at the same time. And happily, I turned around and just gave one a wild yank, and it started, and then the other guys took care of what the heck was wrong with it.
You got to shore, or you didn't have to go run the rapid then?
No,
Yeah.
no. Oh my God! Can you imagine, say, 20 feet out from the from the right bank? Can you imagine being 20 feet out there? I mean, how would you run it? Out of control. That's how you'd run it. You'd wallow from shore to shore and rock to rock.
Yeah. What's up? Yeah, it's in there's a brown kit bag in the far right side of our box.
Like an old casino.
It's a brown nylon bag. It's right in there.
You're not going to eat without us, are you?
Oh no, we're far away from that.
Uh-huh.
Relax, have a good What was your involvement with the uprun, and how did that go? What are your memories of that?
Well, I guess my memories of that is that I'm sorry that I was not able to make the trip, but I sure as heck was glad that I made as much of it as I could.
And how much was that?
Well, it was about 9 days, and it was the down run part. The Beater Corporation came to my dad and said, "Can you put together a crew? Here's what we want to do, and then we'd like to evaluate you. We'd like to have you evaluate our plans and give us an estimate of what we have to do, or maybe to do it better, or at least." And the other thing would be to tell us how much it might cost. So anyway, that's what my dad did, and he selected through the people, or from the people that have been on his trips in the last few years, he selected 8 or 10 people who he thought were reliable and good hard-working guys, and with a modicum of talent. The objective, as you know, was on the down trip to have my dad do this kind of evaluation, number one. Number two, to try out the various types of rapids in the canyon. I mean, if it's a straight shot, if it's a C, if it's, et cetera, whatever it is, do that and put that in your estimate. And let's see, the last thing was to do the actual running of the boats in the preliminary, on the down run, if you will. So that was the main thing. Now, as I recall, we started with what we call what the Kiwis called the wee red and the wee yellow. One was 24 foot. The other one was 18 foot. We wanted to test those to see how good they were. Well, we started off at Badger, naturally, and we had to turn those boats back because they didn't operate properly, or they had unfavorable and unreliable wind resistance techniques, meaning they had too damn much freeboard. And what would happen is, I can't remember whether I wrote at Badger that time or the next one. So down, but most of us, or many of us, have the style of, if we're being careful, of the style of just coming down as though we were going to block the river and going quite slowly, depending on the size of your boat and your load. But generally, we're down fairly well, and there was plenty of power. There were twin Chrysler Marines, I think, in each of those boats. I think that's the case. So there's a lot of power. You don't have to get going very fast. And what I would do is I would go just as fast as I had to go to keep my way up until I finally decided this is the way I want to go, and you just crank it up and you're there. So, is that enough of an answer to your question? No, it was, all right. So anyway,
We should stop and change. Is it battery or? Yeah, we got to change the battery. Okay, let's see. Are we rolling again? Okay.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that or not?
Yeah.
Okay. The question that you asked was what happened to me on the up run, and I was saying, leading to the point by saying that we had to get rid of two of the boats, the Cathedral Hull boats. The wee red and the wee yellow stayed, but the big red and the big yellow we had to send out. And the problem was that you can't steer them well enough. And what happened, I think what happened was that in the upper canyon, maybe 20, 30 miles down at the most, we cracked the hull of, I think, the big red, and we had to haul it out. I remember seeing it on the side on a big A-frame. The guys were cranking the thing up so they get to it. But anyway, we lost so many days that my vacation time ran out. And having two youngsters and a wife, all of whom developed the habit of eating on a fairly regular basis, and like it too. I didn't understand that. But the time ran out, and a couple of days after I had to go back to Seattle. We were living there then. I had to go back there to go back to work. They took the boats down to down to Lake Mead, and they decided yes, you could make it, though they were putting some gas away. They decided yes, you can make it. You have one chance in three. The water was falling quite a bit, I believe. I think it was down to around 12,000 second feet. I'm just going by memory. And so they decided, the dealer decided that they would do it, would try it, and they took some of our crew. My dad went, for example, and several of the other guys went. I was not able to go. And the one guy who was really a terrific driver is John Hamilton. He's the inventor's son. He put all the boats up. None of the other guys could do that. I don't know whether I could have done it.
Yeah, I understand he drove them all up through lava falls or wherever it got tricky. He would be the guy that they'd go to.
That's right.
Real talented.
Yeah.
Was he on he was obviously on the down run.
Yes, he was.
What were your impressions of him?
Well, he has a quiet sense of humor. He's a very self-confident, but also self-effacing kind of person. I kayak with a fellow like that. He's just quiet, very bright. He's the kind of a fellow I think I'd like to have along on more standing motorboat trips.